To say we're delighted to welcome Richard Brackstone, Chief Executive of RBMC, Specialist Risk Management and Performance Consultancy. The focus, I suppose, Richard, of RBMC is helping organisations in construction to better manage risk and improve performance, margins, and enhance the shareholder value. So in this webinar, Richard's going to talk to us about the nature of risk in construction, the implications of it, managing risk and improving outcomes, and give us an insight into the tool which you've developed at RBMC into helping construction companies, and I think a few live examples, Richard, as well. So with no more ado, I'll pass over to you, Richard. I thank you for giving your time this morning, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Mark, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to do this. I'm really pleased to try and share some information with your members that they will hopefully find useful and interesting. As Mark said, I'm Richard Brackstone. I'm the Chief Executive of RBMC, and thank you for joining us today. So first, just an introduction to RBMC. A little about me. I'm a 40-year veteran of the industry. I originally trained as a quantity surveyor of a major national contractor. I've held senior management and directorship positions for over 3 decades, involving both operational and commercial responsibility, with experience across both main contracting and subcontracting. And I think I've got a really balanced view of the industry because of that, as well as running my own refurbishment and fit-out company for a number of years. I started RBMC to utilise my experience and particular skill set to have a positive impact in the industry. I'm an advocate for change in the industry, and in particular need to improve margins and reducing risk dump. I was recently quoted in Building Magazine by the editor Chloe McCulloch on these issues. I regularly post relevant content on LinkedIn, have appeared on several industry podcasts, and have had several articles published in industry magazines. Excuse me. So, about RBMC. As Mark's already said, RBMC is a specialist construction risk management and performance consultancy. We provide high-level advice and guidance to business owners and executives within the UK construction industry. We specialise in helping companies to develop active risk management and commercial best practice. We remove doubt and bring certainty. And that's what we're all about. We're focused on helping your business to manage risk better, improve your outcomes, increase your margins, enhance shareholder value, thus enabling your success. And that's where our tagline, enabling success, comes from. So what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the nature of the industry, risk and its implications, managing risk and improving outcomes, because all of those are intrinsically linked. I don't need to tell you that construction is inherently risky. Everyone on this webinar today knows that. Today is about trying to just refresh you and refocus you on the issue of risk management in construction. The Office for National Statistics recorded that construction was responsible for 18.5% of company failures during 2021, the latest available figures, and yet only represents circa 7% of GDP. So you can see from those figures the imbalance between the proportion of failures in construction. Incidentally, we employ circa 10% of the UK workforce. We are one of the biggest employing sectors in the industry, not that you know it from the way government treats us. We're notorious for having low margins. We'll return to this point. The last 3 decades or so have seen an increasing transfer of risk from clients to contractors, increased use of D&B with incomplete design, errors in design, risk dumping responsibility for the base design and ERs onto contractors, as well as pushing existing condition risks and frankly any other risks they can possibly get away with onto contractors. We're given little time to tender or to identify, deal with and properly price these risks. Plus we don't get paid for tendering. The subcontracting model adopted over the last 40 to 50 years was partly a response to managing risk, albeit it can well be argued that in the long term it has just created more problems, creating chains of risk dump, reduced training, and a model where main contractors are effectively now service companies, but not paid like service companies and carrying far more risk. How do margins compare? This is an important point. Here's how construction compares to both the manufacturing and service sectors in terms of profitability. Construction has an average margin of around 2.2%, whereas manufacturing is 6.5%, and the service sector is 15%. Construction faces risks in three categories. Statutory, the rules, things you must comply with. External, those factors you cannot really or easily control. Functional, what's involved in actually doing the work, much of which is controlled by statutory and affected by external. So let's look at those three areas in more detail. Statutory, all the laws, all the rules that apply to us, and there are many. Employment law, planning regs, building regs, the construction acts, all of these laws, rules govern what we do every day. Functional, this is the detail that we deal with every day. The contractual issues, cash flow, insurance, supply chain, payments to us, payments to others, parent company guarantees, all of these issues that we have to manage daily to make construction work. External, economic, international, political, social, all of these outside factors affect what happens to us in the industry, but we can't really control any of those. So what's the implications of poor risk management? If we look at statutory compliance, they can be significant. Have a big health and safety issue, you're likely to get prosecuted, face significant legal expenses, huge time commitments, possibly even imprisonment. And there you go through the list of the other things that can happen as a consequence of failing to comply with statutory requirements. And at the bottom, stress, worry, and anxiety. Functional. This is where we face risks daily that have negative impacts on us potentially. Project delays, increased costs, reduced profitability. You know these, you deal with them every day. But just look through that list and refresh yourself on the things that you're dealing with. And external, this is a bit of a mixed bag because it can go either way. We can have inflation, deflation, reduced workload, improved workloads, skill shortages, ease of employment. It can go both ways. We can't really control it. But if we manage these better, we can better cope with these. Here's some real world examples. Anyone that thinks cutting corners and saving money on health and safety is a good idea is deluding themselves. Here's 3 recent cases of prosecutions over accidents that have happened in construction. Just focus on this middle one. A very simple incident. An electrician fell from a set of steps and was impaled on some metal pipes. This wasn't a big complicated crane lift. It resulted in a £550,000 fine and a £200,000 compensation award. That's £750,000 just in the court decision, plus a 14-day trial, which would have cost a fortune. I'd estimate that was £100,000 probably. Costly defects. House builder Barrett is having to knock down and rebuild 36 brand new homes at a cost of millions, all because they didn't pay enough attention to the foundations and the soil conditions when they were building the houses. Excuse me. Cybersecurity. I'm aware of a construction company that suffered a cyber attack. They had circa £250,000 of payments that had been processed by their accounts department, ready to be processed through the bank. In the interceding period, somebody got into their systems and transferred where all those payments were going to. They managed to recover about half of that money through the police, but they still took a sizable hit. If they hadn't stopped it when they did, they would have lost £1 million. This is a real threat for the industry at the moment. The criminals know that we move large quantities of money on a regular basis. You have to get your cybersecurity in place. And then for those that want to go a little bit further, operate a cartel, you are going to get your wrists very severely slapped. I'm sure you've all seen the reports of what's happened to the demolition companies. 60 million in fines. One company receiving almost 18 million in fines. Employment disputes. Employment tribunals can be extremely costly for various reasons: the potential awards, legal fees, management time, and negative publicity. And this one here, abuse of provisional sums. This is a real world example I want to share with you. I recently wrote an article on the use of provisional sums. In it, I talked about the abuse of provisional sums and specifically the misdescribing of items as defined provisional sums when they don't meet the requirements to be so described. The intent of this approach is to try and make the contractor responsible for the program implications and prelims costs associated with provisional sums. I've since been contacted by a main contractor who has recently been caught by exactly what I was talking about. Their design and build contract had been amended to remove the concept of undefined provisional sums and effectively make all provisional sums defined. They missed it. They received an instruction to expend a £200,000 provisional sum for a, quote, extended bulkhead, which turned out to be a 4-metre wide feature ceiling just after they issued their fully coordinated ceiling plans. It required a full M&E redesign. It caused delay to the project. They're still in discussions with the client over that issue. They are hopeful of recovering their position Thankfully, that £200,000 provisional sum was woefully insufficient, and the true cost is more like 750. So they have some arguments, but that is an absolute classic example of failing to manage risk. So what's consistent about all those examples I've previously given? They're all readily avoidable with focus, attention to detail, and due diligence. So let's talk about managing risk and improving outcomes. Build UK has recently issued guidance on various regularly used contract conditions which it considers too onerous and unfair for contractors to bear. Whether their members will abide by the body's own advice remains to be seen, but it's a really useful start. It's one that I was really pleased to see, and it provides the perfect negotiation starting point for you guys. Here's the 6 subject areas: fitness for purpose, unquantifiable risks, specified perils, breach of contract, unlimited indemnity, uncapped liabilities, and performance securities. So just to look at those in a little more detail, this is what Build UK have said. Fitness for purpose creates unrealistic and often indefinable expectation. PI insurance will not cover fitness for purpose. It leads to higher costs and cautious design approach. Unquantifiable risks don't include EOT and loss expense risks that the contractor cannot reasonably ascertain, such as asbestos, antiquities, unexploded ordnance, statutory undertakers. These should be held as project risks, not dumped onto contractors. I was going to make a crack about unexploded ordnance being more an issue we face in London thanks to Hitler, but there may be some implications over here. Specified perils. JCT calls them specified perils. NEC calls them prevention events. Do not amend contracts to make contractors liable for the time implications of specified perils, such as fire, lightning, flood, these big issues that are covered by insurance. The normal position is that these are relevant events, but not relevant matters. So a contractor gets time, but not costs. But people keep amending contracts to write out the time element. Breach of contract. Don't include a blanket indemnity for breach of contract. Doing so exposes the contractor to unforeseeable, unlimited, and in some cases, uncontrollable risk. Wide indemnity provisions are often uninsurable, so in practice, this onerous clause likely serves little real-world benefit. Uncapped liabilities. There is no point in having an extent of liability which is beyond an amount a contractor will ever be able to afford or insure for. You are setting out a proposition which could potentially bankrupt an otherwise viable contractor. As a contractor, why expose yourself to such risk? Performance securities. Do not use on-demand performance bonds and only include parent company guarantees and collateral warranties which have no greater liability provisions. So there's a raft of issues there that Build UK has said clients should not be putting into their contracts. And the fact that Build UK has said it provides you guys with the perfect opportunity to push back against such clauses, and I implore you to do so. So, talking more about how we manage risk on a daily basis, areas where contractors regularly fail but rarely admit it. How many do you recognise and how many more can you add? Not pushing back against unreasonable contract terms, which we've just spoken about. Agreeing to lead-in periods which are too short. Failing to provide sufficient resources at the start of a project. Slow or late procurement. Late design and insufficient design management. Slow early progress and too relaxed on program. And those things are often interrelated with insufficient staff at the start of a job. Failing to monitor progress properly. Underestimating time to completion. Those two are obviously linked. We do it time and time again. Insufficient quality control, causing reworking and or snagging and de-snagging delays. Inadequate protection. Testing and commissioning problems. You work really hard to get the job finished, and then right in the last knock-ins, you can't get handover because the testing and commissioning of services hasn't been given sufficient time, goes wrong, there's problems, you're trying to balance systems, and all of a sudden you're late and facing LADs. The ultimate implication of poor risk management, company failure. Here's some of the well-known recent failures within the industry. And only last evening, I was texted by a colleague in the industry warning me of the next one. I won't name them, but there's another one coming. So, this is an important issue. What is risk management? This is what we say at RBMC. Risk management is the process of identifying, assessing, and prioritizing risks or potential risks to an organization or project, and the deliberate implementation of decisions, actions, procedures, and processes to manage, mitigate, or avoid the negative impacts from those risks or potential risks. Excuse me. As well as seeking to maximize the potential from the positive impacts of identifiable and foreseeable potential circumstances. Risk is not all about negative. We'll return to that. It requires an active, open view and mindset to seek to identify as many such risks and opportunities as possible, as well as to constantly reevaluate and learn from said circumstances and actions. Now, here's some other definitions of risk management, which I'll just let you read through on your own briefly. Okay, I'll move along. If anyone wants to see that again at the end, we can always go back. So what do we mean by risk management as opposed to risk avoidance? Risk management, as we've just learned, risk management is principally the process of managing, mitigating, or avoiding the negative impacts from identifiable potential circumstances. This can involve the avoidance of risks, such as declining to tender for a particular project. Many people assume wrongly that risk management means risk avoidance. That is not the case. Risk avoidance, however, is by its very wording, the avoidance of risk wherever possible. In construction, complete risk avoidance is impossible. It's therefore important to understand the difference between and not confuse these two terms. Not only that, but risks and their management can be positive in impact. In fact, it's often through risk management that we obtain financial gain. And just to give an example of that, I, as a director at a previous company, took a phone call one day from a QS who rang me up and said, Richard, I've got a job to tender. It involved demolishing a concrete staircase in the middle of a live private hospital and building a new one. Are you interested? I immediately said yes. Why did I say yes? Because that was a risky project and it was one that everyone else was going to shy away from. In the end, I secured that project in virtually no competition, and I eventually ended up selling a £300,000 job for well over £1 million. There's a whole story behind that, but it involved the client wanting us to accelerate. But it just shows, makes the point that risk can be positive at times. You have to manage it though. So what are the benefits of improved risk management? Greater certainty, an improved work environment, less stress, less pressured, better staff retention. Staff retention is a vital issue for the industry. Improved outcomes, not just financially, but in terms of program and quality and so forth, and client satisfaction. Increased profitability, which is what we should all be driving towards, and enhanced shareholder value, which comes from increased profitability, and at the end of the day is what companies are there to provide. So measuring risk management abilities, why, how, the benefits. Everything that gets measured gets better. In the early genesis of RBMC, somebody said that phrase to me. When they first said it to me, I thought, oh, there's a bit of management speak for you. But actually, I went away and I thought about it. And I realized that actually it's right. If you don't measure things, how do they get better? How do you know they've got better? And I sat and cogitated about this phrase for some time. And then I started thinking about how it related to construction and how it related to risk management. And what I realized was that construction companies don't have typically the ability to manage and measure their risk management. And that was where the RBMC Construction Company Risk Appraisal report was formed, because we set about answering this question, answering this problem. How do construction companies measure how good they are at risk management? So our report is unique and innovative. It provides fast outcomes. It's cost effective and value for money. It's effective and efficient. It's been developed with over 40 years industry experience, and it stress tests an organization's ability to manage risks. And then it provides tangible metrics and useful insight. We stress test a business's functional performance and knowledge across 4 key pillars: health, safety and environmental, corporate governance, operational performance, and commercial management. Here's an example of what our report looks like. The 4 pillars that we've just spoken about. the inherent foundation of risk in construction. If you underpin that foundation with effective processes and procedures under those 4 pillars, you end up with a strong foundation to build on and ultimately end up with successful business. So our report provides a score of your ability to manage risk. It provides an overall score, and we identify the best and worst performing pillars. We give some narrative about how that overall score sits. We then look at the score for each of the 4 pillars and how that stands up. And then we provide narrative on each of the pillars with the good, the bad, and the areas for improvement. And then the last element of the report, which you can see starting here, is the score for each of the subject areas that we look at. As you can see from the next slide, the list is extensive. And the important thing about it being both narrative and scored is it provides tangible metrics. You can then run the report in a year's time, see and measure the actual improvement between where you stood before. And that's something that construction companies have never previously done, to actually measure their risk management abilities. We were really pleased recently when our report was featured in one of the trade magazines. So what are the benefits? It provides clarity and greater certainty. It identifies strengths and weaknesses. It gives you a current baseline of where your business is. That provides the foundation for continual improvement. It identifies target areas for action and improvement, and it provides benchmarking for ongoing improvement. Active risk management, which I mentioned right at the start, is an approach developed by RBMC. It seeks to ensure effective risk management by a combination of strategic focus and the application of a targeted management regime. Its aim is better management of risk, improved outcomes, increased profitability, and enhanced shareholder value. We identified 10 steps to active risk management. I'll just give you a minute to have a look at those. You may possibly have seen I posted these on LinkedIn a while back, a whole series of 10 posts in which I described these 10 steps. Now I want to talk about marginal gains. I wrote an article earlier in the year on profitability in construction companies, in which I examined the profit margins of those companies within the Building Magazine top 150 league table of the largest construction companies. I split out all the house builders. I looked at purely those companies that derive all or most of their income from construction, and I analysed how their profit margins sat. I'm happy to provide a copy of this report to anyone that hasn't seen it before and would be interested to see it. But the report identified that the average net margin of construction companies is just 2.2%. Given such slender margins, an increase of 1% in a contractor's overall profit margin would see an increase in their net margin by almost 50%. Thus, marginal gains are extremely important and potentially impactful. Simply reducing the negative impact of events will lead to an improvement in your outcomes and profit margins. And I can demonstrate this. Inspired by my social media activity and me challenging him that his company profits were too low, a friend and former colleague of mine undertook an exercise within their company, which is a circa 150 million turnover company. They did three principal things. They used my report as a guide to benchmark their own profitability against. Furthermore, they focused the results onto their 12 closest competitors. They reviewed the profitability of all their projects over the preceding 2 to 3 years. They identified all their loss-making projects and investigated why they had lost money. Here's what they found overall. The profit margins across them and their closest competitors range from a 0.3% loss to a 2.9% positive margin. They were mid-range at 1.27%. They found 13 million of direct loss across 10 loss-making projects. Add to this the 8 million of overhead costs across those same projects, giving a total loss of some 21 million pounds. Other profitable projects restrain the impact to a circa 1 to 1.5 million net profit over each of those years. Not incurring those losses would have seen a circa 8-fold increase in their profitability. On the loss-making jobs, they found the following. Economic pressures were understandably a factor: COVID, inflation, and labour supply issues. We've been through a very difficult few years. Outside of these, failure to effectively manage risk was the key component and the biggest overall factor. And this manifested in the following areas: downward risk push from clients, amended D&B contracts increasing their risk, existing condition clauses, errors and discrepancies in ERs and client design, and problems with novated designers. As a consequence, they've now significantly changed their whole risk management strategy, are declining certain tenders and pushing back against particularly onerous contract terms and conditions. And I encourage all of you to do the same. Next steps. Here's my suggestions. Connect with me on LinkedIn and follow our LinkedIn company page. Visit our website. Consider today's content. Think about how risk management is affecting your outcomes and profitability. Think about ways in which you can improve your risk management. Consider moving towards implementing active risk management. Talk to us about undertaking a risk appraisal report for you. I particularly recommend that one. And talk to us about helping you to improve your risk management and commercial best practice. And again, I wholeheartedly support that one. And finally, drop me an email on richardb@rbmnc.com or a LinkedIn DM if you've any questions or thought regarding today's webinar. That's if you don't want to ask them now. Thank you for your valuable time. I hope you found today of interest and useful. Now I'm going to pass over to Mark to see if we've actually had any questions.
Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
There, very content rich. And some really good thoughts and themes in there. Couple of thoughts, couple of questions to get us going. One of the questions in my mind just is obviously thinking particularly of our own membership. We have, yes, some of the largest companies on these islands. We have an awful lot of very small companies for whom risk is equally important. But does this type of analysis lend itself to smaller and medium-sized businesses as well as it does to the more sophisticated, larger organizations?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, just to give an example of that, we've recently done a report for a client in London who is actually a property development business. So it wasn't a usual client for us, but they wanted us to run the report for them because they've moved from a model of employing main contractors to one where they're now going down a construction management route. And that's a business that employs 6 people currently. So yeah, it absolutely works for small companies as well as big companies. And what I would say is that I would say this, it's not expensive relatively. And when I say relatively, when you look at the prelim run cost of just one job, or the L&A damages that companies can face on one job, to do our report is not a significant cost in comparison to those risks. And it could save a lot of money.
Another question, typically on whom does risk management fall in a company? Whose responsibility is it? Whose job description includes risk management and whose doesn't?
Well, that's a really good question, because that's one of the problems. I think as a subject, it doesn't typically fall into anyone's job description. I think it's extremely rare for anyone to have someone in a risk management role specifically. We're talking to a couple of companies actually currently about potentially providing that role for them on specific projects where they see particular risk. But I think it is a big issue within the industry. The reason for the presentation today, the reason for starting RBMC, is that risk management is fundamental to increasing margins. There's 2 key issues for me in improving margins in the industry. One is stopping the push down risk from clients, and the other one is understanding and implementing proper risk management and not shooting ourselves in the foot. So I think companies need to think and look hard at who is doing their risk management and how they're doing their risk management. And I'd like to see more companies employing someone specifically in that role.
Super. One observation I have about risk management in construction companies, and this won't surprise you, but is that they're very coy about asking questions. They don't keep their hand. So listen, we have no other specific questions there unless somebody wants to pop one in the Q&A very quickly. Assuming that they don't, Richard, we have your contact details. We'll be sharing those out. And
Thank you.
No construction companies prefer to do these things one-to-one, so I'm sure they'll follow up with you if they have any questions.
I'm happy to talk to anyone on any subject around risk management or anything else in the industry. You can find me on LinkedIn, and if you noted down my email address, you've got that. If not, you find that via LinkedIn and our website. More than happy to talk to anyone. Perfect.
And as I say, we've recorded this session and we'll be sharing that out as well afterwards. So Richard, it just remains for me to thank you for giving your time this morning. I think that's been very informative. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions afterwards, but thank you again for your insight onto that, and thank everybody for taking the time this morning to join us. We hope you got something out of that, and we look forward to seeing you again at another webinar. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Richard.